This is Building a Regenerative Future with Project Drawdown, Science and Solutions for People and Planet, with Chad Frischman, Senior Director, Research and Technology, and Mamta Mehra, Senior Fellow for Project Drawdown. And today we're going to be hearing how they want to inspire us to explore the cascading benefits of solutions that address climate change and other global challenges to create a path for a regenerative future. And I love that phrase, cascading benefits, because of those of you who attended yesterday's talk on tipping points know that could be a negative cascade, but when it comes to Project Drawdown, it's always framed in this very science-centered, doable, positive cascade of positivity. And I really, really appreciate that. So I want to introduce Jim Simon, who's a partner in this headliner and also a partner with tUrn project. He is the Director of Sustainability at Gonzaga University, and he came to that position after serving in various areas on the East Coast, New York, as a volunteer and working in sustainability. And at Gonzaga, they have a missioned goal of being a climate neutral campus by 2050. And so Jim is there to really spearhead that and have a vision for that, plus a whole lot more. And he engages the campus and their community at Gonzaga University in really interesting ways and has some really amazing programs fostering a culture of sustainability that is resilient and responsive to the dynamics of higher education and our changing world. So I'm very happy to hand it over to Jim Simon.
Thank you so much, Kristen. And thank you for having me today to kind of introduce our two speakers. I'm so excited to join. It's energizing to join so many of you, colleagues and friends from Jesuit and non-Jesuit colleges and universities from far and wide. Kudos to Santa Clara, Kristen, the Gonzaga Environmental Organization for also sponsoring this event, and the entire tUrn team for all that you do for this amazing celebration. Over the next hour or so, we'll be focusing our attention on solutions to climate change that create a path towards a regenerative future. I don't know about you, but I hear the word no a lot. Whether it's from my 6-year-old son or from a leader who can't see the benefits of a sustainability project, no, when used in this way, is a shield that deflects attention away from innovation and solutions-based approaches. I suspect that we will not hear no from our panelists today. That's a great double negative. Building a regenerative future isn't about closing doors or deflecting. It's responding with a resounding yes, yes and, or yes but, as we consider the right way forward in these challenging times. So today we'll hear from Chad Frischman and Mamta Mehra from Project Drawdown. Chad is the co-author, lead researcher, and principal architect of the methodology and models behind the New York Times bestseller Drawdown, the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming, and the Drawdown Review. Chad works with Project Drawdown to model and assess climate solutions on the path towards drawdown. Chad has an interdisciplinary background in public policy, human rights, sustainable development, and human and planetary well-being. Mamta Mehra is currently working with Project Drawdown as a senior fellow and research program officer, focusing on drawdown solutions in the land use and food sectors and managing the research fellowship program. Dr. Mehra has worked in various research capacities for Swiss Aid, UNDP, Australian Aid, and the World Bank. Dr. Mehra has authored many peer-reviewed papers and is one of the contributors to the New York Times bestselling book, Drawdown. So glad to welcome Chad and Mamta today. We'll hear a presentation from them, and then there'll be time for questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
All right, well, thank you, Jim. And thank you, Kristen. Thank you all for joining us today. It's my pleasure to be able to come today and to speak with you all a little bit about the work we do at Project Drawdown, and so timely being Earth Week, in celebration of the planet that we're all call home, and we're all in one of the greatest crises that the planet has ever faced, and it's one of our own making. It's climate change. And so today we're going to learn about some of the solutions that are exist today, that are readily available, that can stop this and help solve this planetary crisis that we're in. So to start with, I'd like to, for some of you may not have heard of Project Drawdown or what even the word drawdown means, let's start with a quick definition. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So drawdown is really that point in time when greenhouse gases in the atmosphere begins to decline on a year-to-year basis. It's that point when we take out more of those heat-trapping gases like carbon dioxide, methane, fluorinated gases, and nitrous oxide, and a host of other greenhouse gases, pull more out of the atmosphere than we're putting in. The proposition is really simple. When we can change that composition of those concentrations of those greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, we can stop global warming and begin the long process of reversing it. But how do we get there? Well, first of all, we have to identify where are these emissions coming from? What are the sources of those emissions that we put into the atmosphere to start with? And when we identify them, then we can start to understand what are the solutions to address that challenge. We then have to figure out, well, what are the ways in which we can pull what we already have up there in the atmosphere down? How do we draw down carbon through natural or engineered sinks? And how do we improve society? How do we improve our social and economic institutions to ensure that we're implementing solutions in a just, equitable, and inclusive way? So as a starting point, this gives us a little map of the system that we're dealing with, the natural system. So first, where are these emissions coming from? Emissions come from just about everything we do as a species. All these areas of human activity that we do on a day-to-day basis produce energy, produce money, and produce emissions. So all the energy, the electricity that's generated from when we turn on our lights, or the gas that's burned when we heat our homes, to the factory spewing out emissions from all the stuff that we produce and consume every day, to when we walk out our doors from our buildings that are generating heat and cooling. We go out and we turn on our cars, which burn fossil fuels from our tailpipes. We move from point A to point B, or we get on a plane to travel across the world. All of this is producing emissions. Even the food that we consume, how we produce that food, and the ways in which we interact with our land and ecosystems, this generates a lot of emissions that enter into the atmosphere. And these emissions, again, include carbon dioxide, methane, fluorinated gases, and nitrous oxide, and a host of other ones. And each of these gases have different impacts on warming in the atmosphere and last in the atmosphere in different periods of time. But some, like methane, are more shorter lived but have a very strong impact in the short term. Others, like carbon dioxide, are there for a longer term and have maybe a smaller impact on global warming, but are there in large quantities. But all of these emissions enter into the atmosphere and stay there.
That's true. But the good point is that currently, out of the total global greenhouse gas emissions, nearly 41% can be either removed or absorbed by the land, coastal wetlands, and ocean sinks. However, unfortunately, nearly 59% of the emissions are going back to the atmosphere, and that's the worry. The other worry is that the sink, what you are seeing over here, are the current sinks. But the way we are managing our ecosystem, our forest, our wetlands, our grasslands, ocean system, there are chances that we will significantly lose the current sinks what we are having as of date.
So what's in front of us is what are the solutions? What are the ways in which we can reduce, to turn off the sources of emissions? And what are the ways in which we can enhance or turn up those sinks? And there essentially are one of three mechanisms that do this. One is to reduce about the amount of stuff we consume overall, to reduce the sources of those emissions. Another is to replace existing technologies and practices that are part of the problem with solutions that are alternatives that are part of the solution. And third is to restore carbon to useful forms through natural sinks, and sometimes maybe down the line when these technologies become more economically viable and more efficient, we can even have engineered sinks that pull carbon out of the atmosphere. But these are the three mechanisms with which we are able to stop emitting sources, emitting emissions, and to enhance those sinks. And so I lead a team of researchers, over 100 researchers that have taken part in this project from all over the world. And together we have mapped, modeled, and described the most substantive technologies and practices that exist today, real workable technologies that taken together can achieve drawdown.
And you're seeing the Drawdown family over here. You know, we are truly global in nature. Fellows like me, you know, and other Drawdown fellows are coming from different parts of the world with diverse background and expertise. And we all are together in our, you know, larger goal of achieving drawdown and achieving a regenerative future.
And together this team has aggregated and collected humanity's brilliance. We take data, knowledge that are produced from scientists and researchers from all over the world about these different technologies and practices, and we map them in a different kind of framework than perhaps you've seen before, a holistic, comprehensive assessment of all the areas of human activity that are producing emissions and can enhance those sinks, as well as addressing some of these really fundamental human rights-based approaches to improving society. And we've mapped these solutions and calculated the potential impact of the climate and financial impact of these solutions over time, and how this system of solutions, when taken together, can achieve our goals of drawdown. Again, that point in time, that point in time when we really shift the concentrations of gas in the atmosphere, but also when we do this right, when we think about this as a system of solutions implemented in parallel to address the climate emergency that we're facing, if we do it right with justice, equity, inclusion at its heart, at its core, and see how these different solutions not only address climate, but a cascading series of benefits to human and planetary well-being, we can not only solve the climate emergency, but shift the way we do business to something entirely different, a future that we actually want. Now, these are some of the technologies and practices that we have outlined across the different sectors. Now, I can't list all 82 of the solutions that we assess on one slide. They're just far too many to deal with. But these are about the top 25 solutions in terms of their overall impact in terms of greenhouse gas emissions reductions. Now, we measure this in terms of gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent reduced over a 30-year period from 2020 to 2050. Now, when we use CO2 equivalents, this is how we convert the different types of gases I described, methane, fluorinated gases, and nitrous oxide, into their carbon dioxide equivalent. This allows us to compare all of these different solutions as apples to apples to apples, aggregate the results, and to see kind of where we are in terms of reducing those overall emissions in the atmosphere and achieving our goals. And it also allows us to list them in this nice form. Now, these two numbers you'll see here represent two scenarios that we've evaluated. One scenario is aligned with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and Paris Agreement's recommendation for a 2 degrees Celsius warming target. And scenario 2 represents a 1.5 degrees Celsius warming target, which is recommended by the IPCC to keep us in into a sustainable, planetary, and healthy system. So these represent the different types of solutions that we have in front of us. Now, the first thing to note here is the importance of renewable energy systems, renewable electricity systems. Now, about 25% of all greenhouse gases comes from the combustion of fossil fuels to produce electricity. Now, electricity is almost, in some actually think of electricity as a human right because of all the benefits it accrues to economic development, improved livelihoods, etc. So providing electricity to all people is really an important, essential step towards improved livelihoods. But when we're using fossil fuels to produce that electricity, we're contributing a tremendous amount to global warming. And the good thing is there's many solutions that are available to us. These are some of the top solutions that represent things you've probably heard of: wind turbines, onshore, offshore wind turbines, solar panels, utility scale, distributed rooftop solar, or concentrated solar power. But there's a diversity of different technologies, a portfolio, if you will, of renewable energy technologies that include geothermal, micro wind, bioenergy, and a host of other renewable energy systems that produce clean, abundant electricity to supply all that humanity's needs in abundance. And so when we shift to that renewable energy system, is a necessary step, a necessary set of solutions, 100% clean renewable grid that can be accommodated by that diversified portfolio of renewable energy systems. We have to remember, it's not just wind and solar, but we have to have all of the renewable systems online in order to achieve that 100% grid. But we also, that represents about 25% of the problem coming into the atmosphere. But where's the other 75% come from? Well, a lot of it comes from our built environment. Again, our industry, so all those factories churning out the materials that we use on a day-to-day basis, and of course, how we move from point A to point B. And these different types of sectors are going to, the contribution of emissions are going to be different in which country you're in. Some countries, like the United States, transportation is it's the top source of emissions, and others it's relatively low. So these are going to be different in terms of their contribution to the problem, depending on where you are. And part of the reason for this is these industries, these sectors, consume energy both from the grid, so they're consuming from a dirty grid, using coal, oil, and gas to produce that electricity, but also on-site combustion of fossil fuels. In addition, many of the materials that are actually produced themselves have a powerful greenhouse gases. For example, refrigerants, hydrofluorocarbons, chlorofluorocarbons, hydrochlorofluorocarbons, and what are currently being used in our refrigeration systems, in our refrigerators and air conditioners. Hydrofluorocarbons are hundreds to thousands of times more potent a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And we have ways in which we can manage the leakage of those gases from our equipment to prevent them from leaking into the atmosphere and destroying them at the end of life. But we also have alternatives to these really high pollutant and high greenhouse gas global warming impact gases to natural alternatives. And we have this also with many other materials, including concrete and other materials that are high intensity, high emissions intensity materials. When we think about shifting these sectors to reduce our transportation to more electricity-based modes of transportation, building, changing, and transforming our built environment and our industry, these are solutions that are readily available in front of us to address a large portion of that remaining 75%. But there's a lot more to be done.
Let's talk about food. You might be wondering, how food are listed as, solutions to climate crisis. Well, they are, because the way we are producing our food, as well as the way we are consuming our food, are having larger impact on the climate emissions. And also, like electricity, the food and land sector together conventionally are releasing close to 1/4 of the total global greenhouse gas emission. That's the problem. But as at Project Drawdown, we are working on solutions. So these problems are also opening pathways to look for solutions. And there you will find that there are many solutions coming from the food as well as land, which are helping to think about that how better we can manage our food system as well as the land system. So in the land and the ocean system, you will find that we have solutions that are about protecting our prime ecosystem, which is about restoring the degraded land areas, whether it is grassland, cropland, forest land, wetlands, ocean, as well as, that by doing that, what we are doing, that we are building the existing carbon sink, we are also enhancing and expanding that sink which exists today. But more importantly, beyond those climate impact, these solutions are so important for protecting the rights of indigenous people, the rights of the local people, And the restorative solutions, on the other hand, are opening, or they're very important for creating income generation and livelihood opportunities for the community whose livelihood are so much dependent on those resources, really opening an era of restorative, regenerative economy. And then together, land and food solutions are providing us so, impactful sets of solutions. And when we have, back in 2017, when we released our book, and we just noticed that this month we will be completing 4 years, of releasing of our book. So that's quite remarkable. So when we have ranked all of the climate solutions, 82, in the order of their climate impact, we found it so exciting and amazing that out of the top 20 and 25 solutions, nearly more than half of those solutions coming from the land and food sector. Why it was amazing? Because most of the time when we are having climate discourse, the land-based solutions or the food-based solutions, often called as Nature One, they were not the preferred solutions. But I think finding like this will definitely shift the traditional thinking around those solutions, and this will invite more and more actions from the financial institute, from the implementers, from the policymakers to identify these solutions as powerful climate solutions. Talking about health and education, these solutions again going beyond, the impact they're having on climate. These are the societal solutions. And this is about the basic human right to have voluntary reproductive health resources, as well as the basic human right to have equal access to quality education. By having that, in place, we will control our population. That will in turn reduces the demand for a lot of resources. But the education is so much important for the impact of the rest of the drawdown system of solutions, because, a more informed and aware person should be in a better position to adopt these technology and practices. That's why health and education are the core of drawdown system of solutions, as they are having compounding impact on different sectors.
So this is great. So these are all the climate numbers here, and taken together, we see that we can achieve our 2 degrees Celsius warming targets, our 1.5 degrees Celsius warming targets through these scenarios. And we can quantify what are the adoption trajectories, what are the implementation requirements across all of those different 82 plus solutions in order to get there, in order to achieve those climate targets. But the question you may be asking yourselves is, how much is this all going to cost? That's top on mind. When we do the actual financial analysis of this, we actually calculate that in order to create this system of solutions that can solve the climate emergency in front of us, will require around $22 to $28 trillion over the next 30 years, more than we would have to spend anyway. Now, let me repeat that. That's more than we would have to spend anyway. So it's an additional investment, right? But we still have to be investing in infrastructure and expanding our electricity generation, improving electricity generation, replacing our vehicles and our buildings and retrofitting and new buildings and all the things that we need to produce for our livelihoods over the next 30 years has to happen anyway. So if we invest, let's say roughly $30 trillion more over that 30-year period, we can create that future that we want. We can create that system of solutions. And that's may seem like a lot, right? $30 trillion. But if we take that over 30 years, remember that this is a small fraction of global GDP, annual global GDP. It is a drop in the bucket. I mean, if we think about just that, just the small additional cost on an annual basis to achieve this system of solutions, it's kind of a no-brainer. But what makes it even more obvious is if we calculate the net operational savings of this other system of solutions, compared to what, again, we would have to do anyway. And what we see is, compared to what we would have to do, there's an operational savings of between $95 to $145 trillion over that same period of time. Now that makes it, kind of a duh factor, right? It's kind of like, why aren't we doing this? Well, I think in part why we're not doing this is because we have been thinking about how we act and approach global warming in I think the wrong way. We've been instead of focusing on that future that we actually want and seeing the solutions that are right in front of us, we've been focusing on the problem. And this has been going on for decades. We've been thinking about what is the problem. Let's map out the problem. Let's focus on this because it's driven by fear. And it's good to be situated in that space of fear because it grounds us in the reality of what is actually happening. But if that is the principal driver of how we choose to solve this emergency, I don't think we're going to get anywhere, because we're going to be focused on just fixing the problem rather than really envisioning where we want to be. And in an environment of conflict and competition with competing voices and viewpoints, which is fair enough, but when you're trying to also propel this from a systemic point of view, we need to do this from an entirely different paradigm, not from the cauldron of problem, fear, and conflict, but from a new recipe for that future that we want, one of solutions. We need to think about what are the real solutions in front of us, a solutions-oriented approach driven not by fear, but by the possibility of what those solutions can actually achieve. And instead of working in a space of conflict and competition, we need to work together. We need to break down the hierarchical approaches that keep us situated in the business as usual, and move into an entirely distributed approach where we are linking arms and working together in collaboration to achieve what is possible with real workable solutions. Because in this new paradigm of solutions, possibility, and collaboration, we create opportunities. And that's the modality we need to be thinking about to create the future that we want. Opportunities for people and for planet to create a regenerative system, a regenerative economy, a regenerative society of abundance, where well-being is, for people and planet is placed at its core, not profit, not hierarchy. We can work together to create a new future, but first we have to envision what that future is. It's that marker on the horizon. When you go off on a hike and you look to the distance into that mountaintop or the hilltop and you say, that's where I want to go. You have to be able to name where you want to be in order to take the first step down the pathway to getting there. And that's what we need to do. We need to identify and name the future that we want, a regenerative future that is built on solutions, possibility, and collaboration, because we have the solutions that are right in front of us. We can create the future. And I want you all to imagine this future. Imagine where you are. Imagine your town, your city, your community. Imagine your state, your nation. Imagine the world operating with abundant electricity, abundant renewable energy systems, wind turbines on land and in our oceans, in our cities, solar energy, the gathering and harnessing the power of the sun like every other species, every other form of life on this planet. Gathering as the energy from natural resources to provide all the electricity that we need in urban environments, in rural environments, in high income and low income. These providing a renewable energy system provides abundant electricity, resilient and secure electric generation when we do this from a diversified portfolio of renewable energy systems that helps improve livelihoods of people all over the world, improves health outcomes, educational attainment, and reduces air pollution, as well as contributing to reducing the amount of emissions by turning off one of the largest sources of emissions going into the atmosphere in the first place. These are the win-win-win-win solutions, the cascading benefits of a renewable energy system. And we need to rethink, reimagine how we move around in the world, to move with joy, with electric bikes, with bike infrastructure, electric scooters, public transit that's enjoyable. Imagine jumping on a bus and on a metro that's beautiful, exciting, that's sexy. Let's make public transportation sexy so that we can jump on that and enjoy the activity of moving around our cities using public transit. And when we have to move, let's use electric vehicles to move from point A to point B. We have these technologies in front of us, and when combined with a renewable energy system, these are compounding benefits to our planet, and we move around with much more joy with electrified modes of transportation. And we can also rethink and reimagine how we work. Just today, right now, we are experiencing telepresence. We are able to communicate over great distances, transmitting knowledge, information, and community over the internet in ways that don't require me or Mamta to fly over to where you are and produce more emissions so we can be there in person. It also these forms of ways of avoiding moving around too much or transportation, we can be used not only in air travel, but also commuter travel. Imagine not having to commute to work every day, avoiding all that congestion, all the air pollution, and all that time that gets spent in traffic getting from point A to point B. It can be avoided. That produces more efficient ways of working and gets us closer to our families, our communities, where we can spend more time connected to the people around us and less time in cars getting from point A to point B. We can rethink how we move our goods, all that stuff that we're creating. Let's think about better ways we can transport that around the world to make it more efficient and reducing the amount of emissions from our oceanic freight or from trucks and trains that are moving our goods from all over the world. There are technologies right in front of us to do this. We need to rethink the materials we're using from a starting point, right? Instead of continually extracting and exploiting Earth's resources to produce more and more and more and more stuff that gets discarded and gets thrown into a landfill, either from one-time use or sometimes people are throwing things away just because they're buying more and more stuff. But what we can do instead is reuse the things we've already exploited and extracted from the earth through recycling. And this reduces emissions as well as reducing landfill wastage and produces better and better stuff. We need to create that circular economy that's based not on extraction and not on an economy of death, but an economy of life that is regenerative and circular in nature. And we can also rethink how we, the ways in which we, the places in which we live and we work in our commercial and residential spaces, to make buildings not a net emitter because of all the energy that they consume to keep buildings lighting for buildings, keep buildings cool during the summers and warm during the winters. And all the energy that's used by buildings and their operational use of buildings, but also the embodied emissions and the concrete, the steel, all the materials that are used to construct buildings can be replaced with alternatives that, like wood, that can not only can sequester carbon and turn buildings into drawdown buildings. They can, instead of net emitters, can be part of the solution. But we need to fundamentally change the way our economy operates from, again, one that's exploitative and extractive to a regenerative economy based on different feedstocks.
And that transition is quite possible. That transition is possible based on the bio-based regenerative economy. And our analysis have shown that we have, as of date, enough of the degraded land available, whether it is grassland, cropland. And, there's really no need to cut down our primary ecosystem. I'm stressing this point that, yes, there is really no need for deforestation. What is really required is to restore the existing degraded land areas and fulfill the demand for timber or other biomass based on, these solutions, whether it is tree plantation, bamboo, building with bamboo is such a high on demand these days. And these solutions, while sequestering more and more carbon into the soil, because degraded lands are kind of empty bucket. The more the effort you're putting, the more the carbon that will be sequestered on a day-to-day basis. But these solutions, as I've said, that they are kind of bio-based regenerative economy. They are providing livelihood opportunities, income generation activities to the local communities. And beyond that, the corporate sectors, the businesses and companies around the globe are looking at these solutions as their, good targets to meet the climate or the net zero pathways or the sustainable pathways they wanted to pursue. Talking about forest restoration, how this solution is different than the restoration solution I just talked about, because the aim for deforested land area to restore in a way so that we can bring it back to the intact primary stage, and then for there onwards protect them, and then don't allow for any future degradation and deforestation, because there's a need definitely to have some timber plantation coming out of the degraded land area, but we also want to expand the area of forest the prime ecosystem area, because the kind of ecosystem services these prime intact forests are providing, that's enormous, and we don't want to lose them in the coming time. So all of these restoration solutions together are, reducing the pressure on our prime ecosystem. And for that, there is ample opportunities to protect our ecosystems such as forests, such as, wetlands and grassland. Talking about indigenous peoples forest management, we have two solutions to protect forests. One is indigenous people's forest management, the other one is forest protection. We have given higher priority to indigenous people because the way indigenous people and local communities are managing those resources, because for them it is their home, that belongs to them since centuries, and it is the duty of the other part of the world to recognize the services they have offered for centuries by protecting and managing these resources in a very sustainable manner by giving them their due rights and titles. So all of these solutions, the protection solutions, are important to build, as well as to protect the carbon which is stored there in the biomass, in the soil for so long. And if you just do the deforestation on just one flip of this thing, you will emit enormous amount of that carbon into the atmosphere. So yes, they are important to keep those carbon intact into the biomass in soil. And also, as I've said, that the kind of ecosystem services provided by these ecosystem, forests, and also all other types of ecosystem are enormous. Water protection, water purification, biodiversity conservation, and so on. And similarly, talking about ocean, yes, ocean have many more, ways of protecting, offering ecosystem services. And there's also need to protect, the way we have to protect forests, we have to protect grassland, we need to protect ocean system. But that doesn't mean that we cannot do anything on our, ocean system. Yes, there are certainly ways of regenerative activities such as ocean farming. This is a way of, how can you grow some sort of a cropping over there, for example, seaweed farming, for example, kelp forest and all that kind of a thing, which, yes, they are building carbon, they are sequestering carbon, but they're also providing some sort of a biomass, which is having different kind of usage. They can be used for human consumption, they can be used for livestock consumption, and they can also be used at certain industries. Moving from ocean to land, there is, we strongly feel that there is a dire need to shift the way we are conventionally doing agriculture on our cropland and grasslands to more and more regenerative practices. And we have enough solutions, existing solutions, scalable solution as of date. For example, regenerative annual cropping, an organic based minimum tillage, keeping the soil covered, diversified system based annual cropping, which is sequestering carbon, but also providing sustained productivity gains, are helping, to provide food, biomass, as well as, keeping our environment protected. And talking about the other type of solutions, we have tree intercropping, which is about integrating trees into the existing annuals or perennial crops. The other practice such as silvopasture, which is an age-old practice of integrating livestock into pasture and trees, a system having high carbon annual sequestration, and also as I've said, that many of these solutions are also giving you an increased yield. So silvopasture, the livestock in those systems are providing high quality milk as a byproduct. So when we have all of these solutions, those are talking about how, as I've said that, the food system, why they are important, because the way we are producing our food, and we just talked about that there are ways we can produce our food in a more regenerative way, in a more responsible way. And similarly, there are ways that how better we can manage our food once it leaves the farmer's land, once it leaves the farm gate, and there are different supply stages after that. So the way we are producing our food, the way we are consuming our food plays an important role. For example, plant-rich diet. A solution which is talking about a behavioral change where we can have a healthy, nutritious, and a balanced diet where we are integrating more and more plant-based commodities into our eating behavior, have the potential to reduce the climate emissions associated with different commodity types. Clearly, producing beef is much, much more energy intensive than producing a tomato. And further plant-rich diet with our reducing food waste solution, making these two food demand solution a very high carbon impact. And why so? Because globally, as of date, every year nearly 30 to 40% of the foods are either getting lost or wasted across the supply stage, from production to post-harvest, the distribution, retail, and consumption. Along this chain, when the food is getting wasted and lost, not only the carbon, it releases carbon into the atmosphere, but it is also losing a lot of resources that went for the production of those food commodities. For example, water, for example, nutrient, for example, energy, labor, and so on. So clearly, these two solutions plays a very, very important role in also, these are the actions. Sometimes we have been asked, okay, what as an individual level I can do. I think a lot of these two solutions and a lot of solutions which Chad has also explained earlier can be adopted as an individual level, and we can definitely that provide a strong potential to reduce our individual carbon footprint. And further, if we move to the health and education solution, as I've explained earlier, these solutions are so important, so important because the combined impact they are having on the population control is enormous, and in a way it is leading to the reduced demand for so many resources, the resources we need for building, the resources we need for for electricity consumption, the resources we need for transport, food, and all that. So that's why that's why we are calling them as they're the core of drawdown solution. That's the reason for that, and that's why they are having a compounding impact on the remaining drawdown system of solution. And also, as I've said, that education and family planning, they are the basic human right and societal solutions, and especially education is so important because we still feel like the drawdown solution or climate solution, the awareness on these solution is very minimal. There's a huge gap that exists with the global population we have as of date. They are not informed and aware about these solutions. So if they are not aware and informed, how can we expect them to take an action? So we need to bridge that gap, and education has that power to minimize, to overcome that gap, so that we can really, really achieve drawdown and our goal of regenerative future.
So these are just some of the solutions that we can reimagine. We can rethink how we approach the way we do business, and whether that's reimagining or recreating a future where with abundant electricity for all people, new food systems or regenerative food systems that provide enough food and sustenance for all people, for our growing population, or that's or new solutions in our built environment and transportation and our industry that moves and shifts the way we do things from one that is based on an economy of death, economy based on fossil fuels, and one based on life and based on regeneration. This is a holistic system that, taken together, can achieve drawdown. Drawdown is possible when we adopt all of these existing technologies and practices as a system of solutions. The future we want is possible when we name what that future goal is, and we move in that direction by identifying what those solutions are and taking action today as an individual, as a business, as a community, as a utility, as a government, from bottom-up action that we can all take to top-down and to middle-out. Because at the end of the day, all the decisions that we make on a day-to-day basis as consumers, as individuals, have an aggregate impact. And the decisions that our policymakers make every day has an impact on the system. But it's the community where the I becomes the we, that middle out, where we need to change the institutions themselves. We need to reimagine our existing systems to create that future that we want, to achieve drawdown, and to have a world of solutions, a world of abundance, a world of regenerative creation, where we're not exploiting and extracting, but we're restoring and creating more from the resource that we have in a sustainable and regenerative way. But that means we have to rethink the system itself. We need to see how all of these different areas of human activity are actually intersecting. They all feed into each other and to a global system of systems that connects the local to the regional to the global and back down to the across all these different areas of our activity. The things that we consume, the places that we reside and we work, the energy that we consume to turn on our lights and to move around in the world, to the land and the things that we consume, and to our population itself, the health and education, to avoid excessive population growth is really what we're after. What we're trying to present here is we want to reduce the potential of high population growth to more sustainable levels for the planet. When we see this as an integrated system of systems, then we can act. We can re-envision the system from a hierarchy to an ecosystem, to a resilient system that is adaptable, that is collaborative, that is going to be different in different places of the world. Different sets of solutions are going to matter in different places. So we can reimagine, recreate, and build that system with real technology and practices that exist today, and it's readily available. It's already scaling. All of these solutions are already being implemented. None of these are new technologies that are still being in prototype mode. All of them are already scaling all over the world. We need to shift the levers to accelerate their adoption, and that takes individual action, that takes corporate action, that takes government action. We're all in it together to transform that system. And when we do that, as I said earlier, we can achieve our 2 degrees Celsius warming target. This is the composition of solutions to achieve that target. And we see the top 25 still represent the majority of emissions reductions that we estimate, but we need all of them. There are no silver bullets. There's no subset. The top 25 aren't going to get us where we want to be. We need all of these solutions to address all these areas of human activity. And if we want to achieve our 1.5 degrees Celsius warming target, we need all of these solutions again. And they're going to shift in terms of their contributions, because that's dependent upon, the system boundaries. It's dependent upon how ambitious and vigorous we are in our adoption and the timescale that we're looking at. But we need all of these solutions to address all these areas of human activity, all these sectors, as a system in order to achieve our climate targets. Go on.
Yeah. Okay. So the power of the system of solution is so powerful that the collective impact is going beyond the targets. There are many, many cascading benefits, they're offering to, ranging from SDG 1 to 17. And that's what we are showing here. Like, this drawdown system of solutions are for the society, for the climate, and for the sustainable development goals and beyond that.
And what we've done is we've actually mapped all of the different technologies and practices that, again, can solve the climate emergency in front of us, but also are linked directly to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. These are the UN goals that are outlined in order to, by 2030, to achieve a just, equitable, and sustainable planet for people and for planet. But we can actually even go beyond sustainability. We need to think, is sustainability, as the Sustainable Development Goals, is that marker on the horizon that we actually want to achieve? And I want us to challenge ourselves to go beyond the targets, beyond the Sustainable Development Goals, and see all of these opportunities to create the real future that we want, a future that we choose today to create with real, workable, scalable solutions to build together a regenerative future, a regenerative economy, a regenerative society, again, where we're shifting all of these areas of activity to not be extractive and exploitative, but to be restorative, regenerative, to create abundance from the resources that we have, and to envision that, to imagine, to rethink our approach to climate action, to reimagine the future that we want and build that together. And now is the opportunity to do so, because we are the regeneration. No more generation X, Y, and Z. We are together in this. This is what I mean by collaboration, rethinking the system. We are working together across generations, because climate change and poverty and hunger and biodiversity loss and poor sanitation and poor health, they're affecting us today. They're affecting our children tomorrow, our grandchildren, future generations to come. This is not a problem of one generation. We are all together working on this. And so I invite you all to be part of that regeneration. Let's rebrand ourselves, link arms, and build that regenerative future together as one generation, as the regeneration. And that, again, is the top down, bottom up, middle out, coming together to fundamentally change our society, our economy, the very institutions, so that we can come together. And now is the opportunity to do it, because these are all solutions that are readily available. They all have cascading benefits to human and planetary well-being. They all bring us towards that, achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, and bring us towards that regenerative future that we can choose now to walk that pathway together. So I invite you all to join me, Mamta, and so many others around the world that are taking that step to create that future that we choose.